Arts and Science College for taking this initiative in association with CSL. I would like to thank the management of Kongunadu Arts and Science College, esteemed Madam Secretary.
Shreya, you are muted. Please unmute yourself. Shreya, you are muted. Shreya, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, somebody muted it. It's not a problem. Start from introducing the college management.
Sure. I would like to thank management of Kongunadu Arts and Science College, esteemed Madam Secretary, Dr. C.A. Vasu, Principal Dr. M. Lakshman Swami. I would like to thank our founder of Sika Startup Labs, Vishnu Nagraj sir. Myself, Shreyavi, Regional Associate, Community Management and Growth, Team CSL. I am honored to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Ashutosh Srivastava, founder of Insigniq, Jadova, Global Director INQ. He is profound person when it comes to technology. He has over 15 years of work experience in cybersecurity, machine learning, and building reliable, scalable products. We are happy and pleased to have him as our mentor for today's session. I would like to hand over the session to you, sir. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Shreya, and thank you, Kongunadu School, for organizing this for us. I think it's a great platform, and Vishnu, thank you, for inviting me to speak over here. Esteemed professors, I mean, we are at some point students and teachers, so I'm very happy to have you here and giving me the opportunity to speak on the ecosystem of the startups and also about the emerging technologies. Just a little bit of brief background before we start. I've been doing technology for about 15-16 years. I did my undergrad from here, and then I went to US to do my master's in cryptography from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And after that, I joined JP Morgan. I was with JP Morgan for about 10 years before I started my own company. And I have been part of startups since 2006, helping startups in US, and now I do that in India as well. I've been on advisory board for over 50, 55 odd startups. So that's just a little bit of my background. To cover the session today, I think I would like to take it in two different parts. One is the impact of emerging technologies that it has on startups today. And the other one is how we can get colleges and schools to be ready with this emerging technologies, and then how do we, build that entrepreneur mindset in a person? How do we get that in the person? So I'll try as much as possible to interweave both of these philosophies while I'm discussing. And the first thing when it comes to startups, the first thing when it comes to an entrepreneur journey is understanding the product. When we have young people, especially in college students who are into thinking about building something, so they have to think about the product. And then when they have a product in mind, the first thing that they have to do is they have to think of what technology will suit that platform. Being in colleges, we are very focused on learning standard technologies which are suitable for enterprise, which is like Java and C++, and to an extent to Python. And that's the right approach. When we want to go to a commercial engagement, I think knowing these technologies is still relevant, and then it's still more prevalent than anything else. But when it comes to startups, the first thing that a startup has to do is look out for the first 3 to 6 months of their exposure, which means that they have to have a product in hand in the first 3 to 6 months. And usually when it comes to enterprise languages, it's very hard to build quickly and progress quickly, which means that the students have to be accustomed to creating or learning new technologies. And some of these technologies is like JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Clojure. So these are some of the technologies which are coming up. And the reason why they are very prominent is because they can get you accelerated from 0 to 100 in about a week or two. And the other part of this is it's very easy to understand and integrate a business logic to. So when somebody is building a product, the business is the paramount. The first time, the first 6 months of any startup is all about getting the product out and all about how does the technology cover your product. So when it comes to that, it is important that people, if they know languages which they can easily scaffold, which means that if they want to start a web server, it should just be a one line of code. If so, that's something where a language like Ruby or a language like JavaScript becomes very important. And that's the reason why we have something called as a mean stack. Mean stands for MEAN. Mean is Mongo, Express, which is a web server, Angular, which is a front-end development, and Node.js, which is a JavaScript backend. 98% of the companies or startups which are out there use a mean stack because you can get ready with a mean stack within a week stack. And that's something that is so profound in terms of explaining someone that it becomes important that we include it as part of our academy. I'll just stop here for a minute and give two examples of startups where the founders did not know coding at all. And it took them a week's time to build something. One guy, his name was Kevin. So he did not know how to code. He learned Ruby on Rails. Ruby is a language. Rails is a web platform for it. And after a week, he created a photo sharing app. That photo sharing app now is called Instagram. So that came out of 1 week of coding. Similarly, there was another guy. His name is David, PHH. They also created a small platform similar to this. They used a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of Ruby, and then they created a platform for microblogging. That platform is now called Twitter. So both these products came out of 1 week of learning technology. They have moved on. They have moved on to something which is more complex now than what it was, and more to an entrepreneur model. Right? But when it comes to starting, when it comes to starting a product, it's important to build quickly, iterate quickly, and then move on. In terms of our software development lifecycle, right, which we all praise in software, it's a waterfall model to start with. But the moment the product goes out, the moment there are people who start using the product, it is important that we quickly iterate. And that's where the agile methodology kicks in. That's where it is very important that very quickly we are able to understand what the users need, change the product, and then move on. And it can only be done if our code is very lean. And to have a lean code, we can't rely on languages which have sort of like a burden or backpack with them. Those languages are like C and Java because they compile, they run, they have to run a lot of things to get things moving. So it's important in our that when we are talking about startups and we are talking about the entrepreneur development, we teach people the importance of languages which can be learned. Databases which can be learned quickly, like NoSQL databases, there's Mongo, which is Cassandra. And if they want to step back and take a step into relational databases, then they can understand Postgres, which is a free open source. And there was a recent survey where it was compared against Oracle and it came out better than Oracle. So it's a free open source database. So it's important that this is ingrained into them. Because the first 6 months of a startup defines whether the startup will succeed or not. The validation of the product is done in the first 6 months. So that's kind of the first stage where we sit. Learning JavaScript, learning uh, Postgres. This is where we are set. The second, the second phase, which is the growth stage of the company, where the company is trying to uh, grow into more customers, they're trying to get more people on board. It is important to build that testing mindset. One of the things that as a student I used to always be bad at, and I've seen that people are generally bad at this, is testing their product. People think that as long as they are able to develop something, that's good enough. But the reality of the situation is something different. If you're using a product, if you're using, let's say, Uber or Dunzo or anything, if it doesn't work, you would not use it again. If you do a Google search and that Google search does not return the right results, then you will not use it again. And that is exactly true for uh, startups as well. When we are talking about startups, it's very important that um, it's very important that we are able to teach them a test-driven development methodology, which means that they are testing all the time. Am I audible? I think.
Brother, your video is stuck. Audio is
Yes, sir, you're audible,
perfect.
but
Is the video moving now?
Yeah, now fine. Now fine.
Okay,
now it's fine, sir.
sure. So it's very important that we bring in this test-driven development methodology into the startups, into our culture, right? And this is something that people run away from, because we think that as long as we have written the code, it should work fine. But that generally doesn't happen. The second part of that is making sure that um, we take our startups to the next level, which means that this is where they need to know how to do cloud development or how to deploy their startup to the bigger platforms. This is where the knowledge of AWS or a Google Compute Engine comes into picture. It necessarily doesn't have to be, one platform. Each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, and that's something that is not uh, part of the curriculum. But what we can do as a academia is at least tell them that there are options to deploy the code, and even in that there are multiple ways to deploy that. Um, there is serverless computing, there is Docker based computing. Those things are important, because what we want to do is we want to at this point have a philosophy of how do we scale the system, how do we take our startup to the next step. And if to do that, right, some principles of distributed computing come into the picture, which means that what we have to do is we have to think of startups in terms of how they can go from 10 customers to 10,000 customers. That is where uh, making sure that their startup, their product doesn't fail, their product is always live, is becomes very important. This is where it's very important to understand that any or other extra conditions which can make sure that your code can fail, that doesn't happen. To support that, we need to understand how the principles of scale work. And that principle of scale comes from understanding how a cloud platform is. Because at this point, it is very important to get the cloud platform running. So that's the second phase of the development. We are talking about if we are talking about how a startup evolution happens. The first stage is making sure that they understand what languages can help them build a startup. The second phase is where they understand how to do a test properly and how to deploy it on different cloud machines. How to get that mobile development or cloud-based. The second part of this growth stage, which is important, is how do we quickly get more customers? Right? So that's where the product development also branches out into multiple pieces. One is the existing product, which is out there. And the second might be the plugins and the iterations that need to happen on the product. To do that, sometimes it's important to stick to the languages that we learned in our first phase. Sometimes it's important to incorporate other languages. And sometimes it's also important to bring in a completely new third-party product into the system. Right? Can people mute? Thank you. So what I mean is that, let's say we are a fintech company. Let's say I'm building a product which is a mobile payment. What will happen is that at this point, when I have some people on board, I would like to go to a bank and integrate with their API. If I have to integrate with an API, then that means I have a third-person API that is coming to my system. When that happens, my system needs to be ready. This is where the concept of microservice architecture becomes very important. We cannot any longer have one code which can, have 10,000 lines of code. We have to have our code broken down into multiple services. And these services are basically services which could be, one service could be about only user deployment, one could be plugin integration, one could be website development, one could be database design. So you have different services which are talking to you. And when the moment we talk about microservice architecture, we have to also talk about event-based programming, which is programming in terms of message queues. So there are a lot of message queues which are out there, RabbitMQ being one of the best, and there are others like Mosquito, there is Kafka, and there are others as well. But each of them have their own way of setting up the queue. Each of them have their own protocol of working. When it comes to IoT-based product, the protocol which is most widely used is called MQTT. So which is a message queue for quick transactions. It has a very small payload, and then that's how it integrates. So the point is that at this point, a microservice architecture is very important, because this is the point where we'll have a team also. This is the point where we'll have more than 5 or 6 people in the company. And each of us will be working on individual pieces. So it is important that one person's code should not break the other person's code. And that can only happen when we have a microservice based. That means that 2 people are not focusing and intruding on each other's code. Okay? So that's why that's the part of the microservice architecture. Microservice architecture does one more thing which is very important. It helps us plan for the next stage. The next stage being the maturity stage. Maturity stage is where the company has progressed into it has gone from a startup to a bigger product. It's become from, let's say, a smaller company to a Flipkart or to an Uber or to a Swiggy or whichever. Right? So when we reach that stage, we cannot have the same base code that we had in our MVC stage or in the growth stage. The reason is that this is where startups go enterprise. This is where we are integrating with external systems. We are integrating with APIs in the banks, or we are integrating with Google for their services, or for Microsoft for their services. So when we have to do that, we have to speak the same language as they are speaking. And to speak that same language, we have to go enterprise. And it also means when we are talking about going...
So
I'm sorry?
So your video is paused again.
I'm actually not doing anything. I think. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So when we are at an enterprise stage, right? The most important thing is we have to chuck away a lot of open source for a commercial license. For instance, if we are using Postgres as a database, we now have to use a commercial version of Postgres. The reason, the importance of this is now support is the most important. When you're a mature startup, support is the most important. We don't expect Amazon to go down anytime. We don't expect when we are trying to book Uber is not working, right? And that can only happen if we have support, because we'll have so many integrations into our platform that it's important that we take licenses and licenses of uh, companies to support us 24/7. So to do those kind of integrations, it's not possible to still have the same code base as what we had in our embassies. And actually, going back to my previous example of Twitter, Twitter started with Ruby on Rails. Within a year, they went from 10 10 customers to 1 million customers, and their platform broke because they did not anticipate that something like that could happen. And that kind of also showed the weakness of simple things like Ruby on Rails and JavaScript. They're not meant to scale above a certain point. So that's why they moved from Rails framework to Sinatra, and then later on their entire platform. And this is something that startups don't think. This is something that most of the startups are not aware of, that what code base that they are carrying in their base MVC stage will not work in the maturity stage. Right? The other thing that the startups don't understand is the importance of regulatory and compliance. We again, when we talk about the software development lifecycle, we talk so much about integration testing, user acceptance testing, and then how compliance will work, how to have like document for auditing and all that, right? But when it comes to actual startup development, that doesn't happen. We always lack that feature, and it becomes important at that point because we are talking to government entities, we are talking to um, our vendors who could be bank, who could be anyone, right? And they all want to have a view in what data are we storing, what data are we not storing. So privacy becomes a very big concern. Compliance becomes a very big concern. Change management. That means that every time we change our code, how are we keeping a document uh, which is showing what the change should be, and which is keeping a track of what are the items that had changed. So that change management becomes very important. Yeah. So support and compliance are the backbone of a mature. And at this point, there should be a way where uh, we tell our our companies and startups that it is important that we move to languages which are more stable, to platforms which are more stable. If you're using AWS at one location, we start to branch out our servers in multiple locations. So we have one server running in US, one server running in India, one server running in UK. This will balance out the load when we have global customers. This will also balance out, let's say something happens to Amazon India, or there's some problem with Amazon India servers. So then your service is still not down. You're still able to uh, get your customers to be on your platform because it's fanned out. And an approach of this fanning out is also that we just don't fan out to one vendor. That means we have support from AWS, we also have support from Google Cloud, we have support from Azure, IBM, whoever it is, right? Whichever one is a good vendor in there. So that way we are ensuring that the service is always ready. So this phase is all about how to make sure that the service is ready. This phase is Secondly, important, all about how to do compliance. And finally, the third most important thing in this case is choosing stable platforms in terms of databases, in terms of languages. Normally, this stage comes in as companies' life at the third year or the fourth year. By that time, the startup should be aware that they have to move on to not just having like developers in the team. You need to have like subject matter experts in the team who are specific into bigger languages like Java and C++, who can actually create code which is sustainable and then stable. There's a reason why companies like JP Morgan are still on Java 1.8 or 1.9. They don't want to move to Java 1.11 or Java 12 because those technologies are still not stable. So the stability is very important, and that's true for even language like Python. Python, even though we have version 3.8, a lot of development is still on 2.7. And this year is the first year where the last version of 2.7 has been released, and after this 2.7 development will be stopped. What it means is that the stability of a platform is very important. What tends to happen to students is that new technologies always sparkles. When we hear that, oh, Kubernetes is there, let's use Kubernetes, or there's Docker, let's use Docker, or there's this new database which is doing this one particular thing, we should use that, right? But in reality, what we have to do is we have to make sure that whatever we use is something which is stable, which is proven out in the market. There is a new language coming out every month. There's a new language which has come out every 2-3 years. But the point is that we have to stick to languages which are stable. We have to stick to technologies where there is support. Because at this point, we'll have so many customers that failure is not an option. So these are the three development cycles of a startup. MVC stage, where I'll just summarize it very quickly before I move on to the topic. The first is the MVC stage, right? So where we are making the minimum viable product, where we are ensuring that our product is ready to go out in the market. We are using lean languages. We are using a very lean stack, something that can be done internally between the founders themselves without need to hire someone. This is also the stage where we quickly develop. Even though there are failures, we quickly take them out and then build the product and make sure that the product is out and customers are using it. That's the MVP stage. The second stage is the growth stage. The growth stage is where testing becomes the primary important factor. We are making sure that the customers always have the same experience, even though we are getting out new versions out. They have the same experience. Making sure that the architecture is broken down. So microservice-based architecture is the second paramount thing here. Third is hiring people who are doing specific jobs, who are into specific things, like web development is separate from database development. The same guy should not be doing these same things. The third stage is the maturity stage. Maturity stage is where we're talking specifically about support, making sure that everything that we own has a support, whether it's databases, whether it's languages, whether it's cloud architecture, whatever it is, it has support. The second thing is we look for subject matter experts. And the third thing is we move to stable languages. We move to stable technologies and always stick to the stable technology. The second part of this entire chain, startups in general, is what kind of platform are we doing? And most of the time, what happens is that when we are talking about startups, most of them eventually turn out to be analytics bits. Even Flipkart, if you see right now, uh, whatever output that they are coming out with, it's an
Sir, I guess your
analytics.
video is turned on.
Uh, I'm
So
actually,
sorry to interrupt. I guess it was turned off. Can you please check?
it's turned on from my side. Turn off and turn.
We can't
Sir,
see
can
the
you
video,
refresh
so we
it?
can just see the profile picture.
Video is not on.
Turned it on. Let me log out and log in back again. Let me see if that fixes it.
Yeah, sir. Sorry for that.
That's okay.
And other respected people and professors, please switch off your video. Means like the video option is there, you have to off the video because it's almost 150 people, 120 people. So it could be great if you off the video. You can listen. If you have any questions, you can ask in the chat. So mute your audio and off your video. It's a humble request. Hope you understand. Because we are in the online, we are
And
depending on.
also, we request you to stop presenting.
Is it visible now? Hello.
No, brother, it's not visible. The audio is not visible. Only your profile picture is visible. Audio is perfect. Video is not visible.
Okay. It's turned on from my side.
Mute.
Others, please off your video and also mute.
Please see if I can join.
Can we use your mobile if possible? Brother?
Yeah, I'll use my mobile.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Everyone, sorry for the inconvenience. We will get back in 2 minutes. Brother, keep this live and you
Yeah.
can join extra as in the mobile if possible. And send in WhatsApp.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just keeping that as mute and then I'll speak here. So that should be fine.
Yeah.
So I was talking about the importance of analytics. When we've talked about how startups are and how startups behave. The second part is at some point every startup has to rely on analytics at some point or the other. And the reason is analytics are important in terms of understanding your customer behavior. It's also important in understanding how to get new customers. And sometimes it's a great way to integrate with a third party. I'll just give a very small example. I'm working with a startup. They're into the media industry, and they have a platform where they're getting data about how fans consume data. And even though it's an analytics that they're doing for themselves, it is also a very important analytics for the producers, because the producers can use that data to understand what kind of content really works in the market. At this point, they're relying something on like a TRP. So the whole point is there is a point in every startup's journey that they will realize that it's a lot about analytics. And with the advent of machine learning, it becomes very important to incorporate applied machine learning philosophy into the startups. Most startups, what they learn right now are something which is very basic, and it's not a fault of academia in general. It's mostly the way machine learning has evolved in the last 4 or 5 years, and the scriptures and the text that is out there is very confusing, right? But if we keep a very practical approach to machine learning, we very focused when we are talking about use cases. What I usually talk about is a use case based approach to machine learning. That means that when we are talking about an e-commerce company, how does their use cases impact startups? Similarly, when we are talking about a fintech company, how does user behavior, how they're making payments, how they're paying their bills, what are they using the platform? So that becomes very important. So it's important to get a view of how a use case based machine learning can be. At the end of the day, machine learning is all about two things: data cleaning and models. And thankfully, in the last 4 or 5 years, the modeling of machine learning has become very simple. It's just 5 lines of code that we can apply any model. Use the base machine learning models. Whether we're using Python or any other languages, all languages have sustainable code which can support machine learning in 5 to 10 lines of code. Data cleansing is another thing. Data cleansing is something that we have started to talk about now, but this is something that we should be talking about all the time. When we're talking about analytics, when we're talking about use case based machine learning, the first thing is knowing and understanding the data that we need for that particular use case, and then making sure that when we create the platform, we are capturing the data in that fashion. We are able to not look at dirty data, but we are always capturing clean data. And this has been something which has been the bane of machine learning, because nobody focused on this, and then most of the time what happens is people get data from outside sources, and half the time they're spending on cleaning the data. But if a startup thinks about it, or even when they're learning about this in the academia, and they think about it, the first thing they have to think about is how to structure the startup in such a way that all the data that they are getting is the right data. One of the best examples of that is bank information. Whenever we have to open a bank account, I'm sure all of us can relate to that. Is there is like 1,000 pages of forms that we have to fill, but we don't fill all the content. We fill only the basic things. Somebody tells us sign here, we'll sign there. Somebody will say that take a photo and then put a picture there. We'll do that. But then there is one person who would fill that form for us, which is not us, which means that there is part of that information that is not validated by us. So banks already are doing something which is not correct. And this is where I think startups can take the lead. So if they're taught properly, they can create information structure in such a way that they're getting the right information from their customers from the very beginning. And they can validate that in the purest of the forms. So, so that becomes the base. The data becomes the base. And when we have good data, then this applied machine learning makes so much sense, because then simplest of the simplest models, right? I mean, nobody has to go to regression models or machine learning models to do everything. We can just have like very simple models which can give us fruitful results if the data is. So getting people to focus on this. There's a new terminology for this which is called data-driven design, (DDD). So data-driven design is something that is primarily focused on the fact that how do we get good data? And coming back to my initial point, right, when we are talking about universities and academia, uh, getting students to focus on how do you get clean data, how do you use uh, technology to quickly build your product, how do you use things that are out there to quickly get from 0 to 100 very quickly is important. There are platforms like Heroku which provide free cloud support for if you have less than 10,000 users, so which is good enough. Right? So things like that, making sure that startups have this knowledge from the very beginning is helpful. And then it's a structured journey for them also, and it's a structured journey for academia as well. The second part, like how do you take that startup in the growth stage? How do you take your data in the growth stage? Is the second step, so stepping stone for them. Which is and I think when they reach the growth stage, as long as we are able to infuse in the startups that compliance is important, support is important. I think they that much hand holding is not important when we get into the growth stage, and that's something that they can do on their. So with this remark, I'd like to close my presentation, and I'd open this channel for questions. 1 hour is I believe, a very short amount of time to talk about startups and technology, but that's why I thought that I'll speak only for 40 minutes and may leave the remaining time for questions. So happy to answer any questions if they're out there. And I think you can put the questions in the chat, and we can take those questions one by one and then answer them.
Yes, sir, we can go for the Q&A. I request all the professors to post your questions in the chat box. And please do not ask the questions directly. I request professors to post your questions in the chat box. We are open for Q&A.
Sure.
So we have a question. So Mohan Nagaraj asked that what is the milestone to raise fund?
Normally, funds should be raised after the product is launched and when you have customers. Uh, it's becoming harder and harder to get funds for companies where they don't have a revenue. So it's important that we have some revenue going, and at least a milestone in terms of how that revenue growth is happening. That point is where the angel investment or the seed investment comes in. In India, that line is very murky between angel and seed investment. But anyone who's looking to raise fund need to know that they need to have at least one paying customer and at least a pipeline on how they want to proceed. So in terms of our stages, post MVP is where it's the right time to raise funds if you require it.
Yeah. Moving to the next question, Bhuvneshwari asks that how can startup be supported by a mentor and how can it be financially supported by the government?
Uh, so there are a lot of accelerator programs which provide mentors. We actually, CSL also provides mentors and advisors to to schools. So so mentorship is usually something that can come in the form of associating with accelerator programs, and so we that way we get the mentorship, right? Even Google and Amazon provide mentorship programs through their AWS and GCP programs. Government funds are unique. It comes in terms of doing something mostly for the sustainable development. If the startup is doing something in terms of agriculture, or they're doing something in solar or wind power or anything like that, where the sustainable development growths are happening, there we see a lot of government funds. And outside of the government funds also, there's like a lot of foreign entities which also do grants and funds. Bill and Melinda Gates being one of them, which are very active in India, and they've supported at least 3 water purifying. So there's like a lot of grants and from the government and from non-government entities, but they usually are limited to sustainable development programs. It's not like you can do a big commercial project and then expect the
Yeah, continue. Okay. So continuing with the question, ma'am asked that how can be protected by startups can be protected by IPR with the technical support by government?
IP. So IP is something that we should go for it ourselves. We can do patenting. In India, we don't allow patents for algorithms, but you can do a patent on a process, and which means that if we can say that we are doing something in e-commerce from step 1 to step 3, which is unique and nobody has done it before, so that's something that we can do a patent for. But one has to be very careful when it comes to patents. If there is any public chatter about what we are trying to patent, it's not patentable anymore. So it's important. It's a very fine line to do a patent. The patent process should start ideally just before the product is about to be launched, so that when we go out in the market and we've launched the product, and so it becomes public. It becomes public information. So the patent officer, when he searches, he'll find the public documents. It doesn't matter if it's your own document. It really doesn't. So the IP should be thought about, and before the product goes live, it should be put into consideration.
Yeah. Moving on, Kalpana Devi ma'am asked, like, she wants your suggestion for few products for healthy startups in India.
Healthcare related. So I'm assuming healthcare related. Please correct me otherwise. But there's like a lot of startups which are doing healthcare related work. There is one called Ayurrhythm, which is using Ayurveda with Apple Watch. They've actually been approached by Apple to do this. So they do Nadi Gyans, which is like your vein knowledge, and then they're using that. So that's a very big startup which has come out. And then there's something called Soje, which has gamified SOUJHE. So they have gamified basically how rehabilitation works. So someone who's going through some challenge, so they are able to do that. So these are some of the startups. And then there's also the Bloom Group, which is into hospital care and management. So there's like a lot of startups, especially in Bangalore and Hyderabad, which are very active in the healthcare.
Yeah. Moving on, Amruta Lakshmi ma'am asked, like, what are the problems faced by the startups when they're dealing with the customers and how to overcome this?
So customers can be 2 types. One could be regular customers, which is us, regular users. So those are mostly consumers. And then there's also business. So when we are doing a B2B startup, then we are dealing with businesses. So the problems are very different between consumers and businesses. Consumers technically have a problem that they're very short-minded in terms that if there's a similar product with a better outcome, then they might go and use that. So those are some of the challenges that they're with the consumers. The second thing with the consumers is and this is something going back to my old story of Instagram, right? In 2014, Instagram changed their design without talking to the customers, and everyone hated it to a point where they lost 12 million customers in a single day. So it is important that when we are doing testing, and it goes back to testing, is we test it with our customers. There's something called A/B testing, where we show the customers what is the current view and what is the next view going to look like, and get their output on how they whether they like it or not. That's how the consumer part of it is dealt with. In the business side, there could be a lot of challenges. There could be integration related challenges, whether our product will integrate with an existing system, or it could be challenges around how the audit works and the compliance works. So getting around the teams, because we have to go through structural layer of teams before the product is accepted. GST needs to be there, and then the company needs to be registered. The company needs to have something. So there's structural challenges when it comes to integrating with the B2B system. So depending on how our product is dealing with, we have to keep that in focus. But the most important thing is always listen to your consumer. Whether it's a consumer or it's a business, always listen to them. That's the best way to deal.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Moving on. Raja sir asked that he has a prototype technology and he wants to know that how to channelize this production with the support of government.
So government usually supports sustainable development projects. If there's a prototype which is into the SGD field, then government is definitely interested. They have an SGD program. I can forward the details of it. It covers a lot of sectors, and if the prototype helps in one of them, then government can help. Other than that, IISc, which is the Indian Institute of Sciences, does a similar program. It has a grant from the government, and if there's a SGD related, sustainable growth related prototype which is out there, then IISc can help. But for a consumer product which is like commercially viable, I don't think there's any government help in that sense.
Okay, sir. Moving on to next question. Purni ma'am asked that in this present situation, is it advisable to launch a startup? I guess she's talking about the COVID scenario.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we should not stop. I think this is like any other time. It's normal time to launch a startup. What changes is how we are promoting our startup. At this point, except digital, there's no other way to promote a startup. To get the audience, there's no other way. But if we know our audience, if we know how to measure, this is the right time to start. And the reason for that is everyone is at one place. Everyone has very limited priorities. I mean, when we are when we go back to our work, there will be travel time, there will be time to interact with people, socialize and stuff like that. And between that, it's very hard to get focus of people to work on to focus on your startup. But when everyone is at this place, it's easier to get everyone's attention. So this is as good a time as any.
So yes, moving on. Like a professor asked, like whether only the innovative ideas are permitted to begin a startup, or any ideas which may not be novel, different, and can be started as a startup.
No, there is no necessity that the idea has to be novel. Any idea works. I mean, if that wasn't true, there would not be any Myntra or Snapdeal or any other, right? So they all make money. They are all able to sustain, right? So there's no hard and fast rule that only innovators startups survive. But at the same time, when we cross the MVP stage and when we are in the growth stage, we need to have an IP for ourselves. That's where people, mistake, right? If you think about between Ola and Uber, right? I mean, Ola was the first one to start auto, then Uber started, then the ride share, bike ride and all. So at some point, you have to differentiate yourselves in terms of IP. But when we are starting, there's no necessity that it has to be an innovator. Right? As long as there are people who are ready to use it, uh, that's a good idea. That's a good enough idea to start.
Yeah, I think we'll take a last question, sir. Subramanya sir asked
Sure.
that, is it possible for third-party accelerator corporate funding?
Yes, a lot of accelerators do help in funding. In fact, all of them help in funding, and some of them run their own funds as well. Numa, which is an accelerator program, it has its own fund. And then in the international market, we have Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 startups. All of them give, when you join the accelerator, which is a 8 to 12-month accelerator, it comes with a fund. It comes with like 100K or 200K that they give out. Even in India, Bloom has it, and then there's like a lot of other accelerator programs that run that do provide um, fund, as well as they provide credits for the cloud, which itself lasts in like millions. So there's like if you get to join an accelerator program, and if you're eligible, definitely it's a good option to do that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
with your permission, can I take another question? So Kavya ma'am asked that, can you point out funding agencies that support for startups?
funding agencies. So there's quite a few, uh, but the most important ones in India are Axel Ventures. And the reason why I point out to Axel is because they can fund from anywhere between an idea stage all the way to Series B. So if you have an idea which is something that they like, they will fund it. So Axel Ventures is one of the biggest ones. Then the second one is Kalari Capital. Kalari is an Indian venture fund. Uh, Kalari is important because they also have two wings. One is the Kalari Capital, which is into bigger startups, and K Start, which is for idea stage startups. And then there's Bloom Ventures, BLUME, Bloom Ventures. So they're actually funding even right now. They're one of the very few venture funds which are even in this COVID situation they're funding right now. And then there's Pi Ventures, which is owned by Mohandas Pai, and there's quite a few, but um, Matrix Partners. I was actually part of Matrix at one point, so they also do a pretty good job. So there are quite a few. Self Partners is another one which funds anywhere between idea stage all the way to Series B. They were the ones who funded Ola also. So
So yes, sir, with this we'll close our Q&A. I would ask you the permission that is it okay land your plan if they have any further queries.
yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help. I mean, I've always told Vishnu also that happy to help anyone who's into who wants to get started. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. So.
Yeah. Yes, sir. With this, I would like to move ahead with the last stage of the program, that is vote of thanks. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. First and foremost, I express my gratitude to our speaker for today's session, Mr. Ashutosh Srivastava, for handling technology decision and evolution webinar and making it a wonderful and informative session. Thank you, sir, for your valuable time. We look forward to work with you in future too. We are grateful to management of Kongunadu Arts and Science College, esteemed Madam Secretary Dr. C.A. Vasuki, Principal Dr. M. Lakshmanaswamy, and I'd like to thank Vishnu Nagaraj sir, founder of Car Startup Labs and the entire team of CSL. Last but not the least, I thank all the respected professors for your cooperation in making this event a resounding success.